Welcome to this webinar, everyone. I'm Knut, and I work with developer marketing at Santi.io, the Composable Content Cloud. And today, I'm very pleased to host this webinar on moving from WordPress to the Composable Stack, or up-leveling your content stack, as it were. And the reason we are doing this webinar is because for the last 10 years or so, people's expectations of the web has changed. The web isn't this passive medium for content anymore, and brands they have to have engaging content across a lot of channels to meet their audiences, and they need to make sure that content stays up to date and are consistent. So take e-commerce, for example. It is an area where it's especially important and where you can stand out if you combine your marketing content with product information and so on. And you need to have that up to date and be correct. And that's why I'm very excited to have two very experienced guests with me today, Serge and Greg from the agency We Make Websites. And they have like substantial experience building the digital presence for international brands using a composable stack, combining services like Sanity and Shopify. Welcome.
Hey, Knut. Thank you for having us.
Great to have you here. So before we dive in, let me give everyone who watches like a rough overview of what we are going to go through today and talk about. We will begin with trying to understand what kind of problems your clients are coming to you to kind of get help with, and why they're looking to move from systems like WordPress and similar. And then we will talk a bit about how do you get out of WordPress, and what friction points are there, and like whatever experiences you have doing this move. And of course, we will talk about the technologies that you use for your clients and how it benefits them. And then we will close the webinar with a Q&A. So if you who are watching now live have questions for our two distinguished guests, feel free to post them in the webinar chat, and we will pick them up and go through them at the end of this webinar. All right, let's do this. So let's just jump right into the stuff. So when your clients, and these are often like huge brands and like have like international markets and so on, when they come to you, what kind of struggles do you often see that they are trying to solve?
Yeah, I can take this one. There's actually quite a few struggles that they are trying to solve. A lot of the time it could be really related just around their content, how they manage it, how limited they are in terms of flexibility, especially if they're coming from a platform like WordPress. And sometimes it's just them growing as a business in terms of the type of content that they want to produce and their own teams, their own internal teams, and their needs. So as their needs are evolving, they usually start hitting these limits on WordPress. And that's why they come to us and they start asking us, like, what else can we do? How can we go over these limits? How can we, reduce that friction so that we're able to write the content that we need, and be able to showcase that to their own customers as well?
Yeah, it must be said that probably all of us have also done work with WordPress. I did a bunch of WordPress sites back in the days, and for someone who has worked with WordPress, it might be like surprising to hear like lack of flexibility. Like for many of us, that's why we chose WordPress in the first place, at least back in the 2010s and so on. Could you kind of like give examples of like what is the lacking flexibility in this case?
Yeah, so a lot of it is due to, like WordPress itself is a monolithic system, right? Like you can do absolutely everything in there, and
people do.
And that is also part of the problem. But in terms of the content itself, the issues that you start facing is you need to start using plugins to essentially get to what you need to do in terms of writing your blog posts, writing your articles, enriching your pages with this content. And I haven't touched WordPress. Like I haven't been a WordPress developer for a while now, but from what I remember back in my day, I used to have to use custom content posts, for example, to extend WordPress. And that was great back then when they added that feature, and like that we had that option of actually being flexible with the content. It worked for a while, But even then, like as content writers start using it, they still hit their limits in terms of, well, I want to be able to reuse my content. I want to be able to link to different aspects of my content seamlessly without friction. And those are the issues that we start seeing, is that these marketers, these content writers, they have to rewrite their content multiple times in multiple areas. And then it becomes very difficult for them to manage as well because of that.
Yeah, and I think also like part of that as well is, as you mentioned, like WordPress has been here for a while, and not to say that it show your age, Serge, that you've been a developer on that. I wouldn't dare. But one of the added aspect, and one of the reason why people are like, most of the company are going toward a more advanced CMS, is also because it can be tailored to their needs, and really tailored to how their team is built and how their team is, how technical their team is, so that they don't have to understand the H1, H2, etc. on a WordPress, but can have that really built for them to be used, and to also to be trained properly on a CMS that's going to serve them, instead of them having to be really knowledgeable in the technology to do anything that they have to, right? So it's really part of making it simpler for them, more efficient as well, and just tailor-made.
Yeah, and most content writers don't want to learn HTML to do exactly what they need to do, right? Like sometimes that's the issue with WordPress, is that, yes, it works nicely, but you still have to learn a little bit of HTML to get the content to look exactly the way you want it to look.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, and sometimes like it seems like people are have gotten so used to what I would say it's not very user-friendly things, like having to type out, or like if you try to do the few like look at content revisions, what changed. Like even editors are confronted with this like jumbled mess of HTML that hides behind a post, right? And it's interesting to have that experience in 2023, for sure.
Yeah.
And I also feel like I must say, like, we are going to talk about WordPress and how it's not great. I always feel a bit sad, because WordPress was how I learned web development. So I feel I owe my career to it as well. So it's kind of like, it's a bit of tough love. But also the fact that WordPress hasn't changed their fundamental model since it was made, basically. If you look into database, we're going to talk about database modeling so much, but like it's still the same tables. Everything will go into a WP post table, right? And it's interesting. It makes it backwards compatible, but that's also probably the problem often.
Well, again, it's not optimized for content specifically. It's made to be a platform for multiple things, which is why it's difficult, again, to get the content that you want to get out of it.
You also said something about scale, I think. Tell us a bit more about like, why is it hard to scale with WordPress? And also maybe say something about what scale we are talking about here.
Scaling essentially in the terms of not just scaling the website itself, like your technology, your tech stack, but scaling in terms of if your team is growing now and you have multiple people having to write content, you have multiple people managing the content, they all have their separate needs as well. That's where you're going to start getting those frictions with WordPress, because again, you have to modify it for every one of those needs and requirements to get exactly what they want, essentially. But then again, it's also, if we go a little bit on the tech side of things, in terms of scale there, everything is hosted on one server usually, right? So there are ways of caching, there are ways of making your WordPress installation faster. But as you're getting more and more visitors on your website, you're essentially putting the entire load on this WordPress monolithic architecture. And if you want to adapt to that and you want to scale and grow, that's when people start looking into headless systems, because now you can break off those, like this system, into multiple systems, use APIs to get when you need it. And you're not relying on one essentially point of failure, right? If WordPress fails, your entire website fails, your content fails, as opposed to now you have these multiple systems that are working together to display your performant website.
That's also the beauty of it. Like a composable stack is going to offer you different services that are truly like specialized in that. So there's the best of the best on doing exactly what the service you're going for, which you usually don't have in in a site like in a purely WordPress site, or you would have to go into a tremendous effort to customize to your need, right?
Yeah, and I imagine this is serious stuff, especially in the field that you're doing a lot of work, like in e-commerce. This is like money out the window if your stuff doesn't scale or work, or if you lose the database connection, as many have probably experienced with a WordPress thing. The white screen of death, is that what they call it?
Yes, that just gives me PTSD.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
No, it's all good. There's that. I don't think we even. I think everyone on WordPress experienced this at least one time in their life, getting hacked. Like WordPress is a very popular framework. It is used by a lot of websites, but because of that, it's targeted quite easily by hackers. And usually, what ends up happening is getting your content injected with bad SEO, and then as a developer, waking up at 2 a.m, having to figure out how to fix all that and clean it up, right?
Yeah, for sure. It's so like we mentioned things like APIs and Composable and so on, and it's kind of like technical stuff. It's interesting how like WordPress has kind of like this feeling of not being like very technical in a way. Like you don't need developers, you can just install plugins and so on. Like this is a rhetorical question. Like how true is that not? Like, what do you see in terms of like the technical requirements for keeping up a WordPress versus more of a composable stack that you're working with?
Yeah, so the one thing that I see is if you are hosting a WordPress website, you don't have you can't just be worrying about your content and getting your content to work. You also have to worry about upgrading your plugins, keeping WordPress up to date, making sure everything is running smoothly, right? So you still need a little bit of technical knowledge in that way, because you could easily break your website by doing something wrong. And I think, I don't know if that answers your question, but that's essentially how I see it usually.
I think it does. Like it's more like a single point of failure, right? Like one bad plugin update and everything goes south. But it seems to me like in Composable Stacks, you can set up these guardrails, and like there's nothing one can do in this system that can actually take it down, because you have set up the constraints, right, that they need to get their stuff done. So yeah, and not saying that there's not challenges with composable technology either. We are not pretending that there's, but it's probably more interesting challenges than keeping a WordPress site floating when thousands of people are trying to get the latest sale or something.
Definitely, so the challenges are different, but you can just focus on what you need to focus, which is managing your website. You don't have to focus on maintaining your website or making sure all the gears are running properly to get your beautiful website up and running.
So when a client comes to you like, hey, we have this WordPress thing, and maybe we have like a WooCommerce, it doesn't work for us, we're looking for something better. What do you tell them? Like what is kind of like the pitch? Well, where should they go?
Well, considering we're a Shopify agency, we're clear, our answer is going to clearly be biased, but for Shopify, toward WooCommerce and WordPress, usually it's because they outgrew the platform, and we talked about it. Like most of the people are going away from WordPress. It's different than people are going away from Magento or Salesforce Commerce Cloud. It's because they outgrew the platform. They need to be able to do more, and they just can't. They don't feel like their plan for growth as a company can be sustained on their current website. And usually most of the discussion would be about how can we port over most of the functionalities that you have here, and making sure that we can either indulge them through Shopify native or through some customization, or handling it through part of the huge ecosystem of third-party applications that Shopify has, which go back to to what we were saying earlier about the specific specialty and how some of those companies are specializing in a specific aspect of the business to be the best at it, which is exactly the same things that we would have with Sanity when it comes to having really rich and powerful content on a website. That's where we would brought up Sanity, especially with Shopify, considering that you're close partnership with them. Like that goes without saying that that would be the first option that we would present, to especially when there's a big component of WordPress, like a big, like I think one of the big things we've seen is recipe, or like maybe like anything that has that is content heavy would be, and that would need some part that wouldn't be necessarily beautiful in a liquid theme. That's when we would usually bring an external CMS that would help us reach that new height that those companies that are talking to us want.
Yeah, and it seems to me like what some of the beauty of like a composable stack is, like you can like choose these services that are like doing awesome on specific domains, like Shopify, like doing a lot of the things you don't want to do yourself with e-commerce and that whole thing. And then you're saying like, but like for content heavy stuff and so on, Sanity might work better out. But fortunately, we can use these things together because they have APIs and we can integrate and so on. How has your kind of like evaluation process been, like figuring out what kind of tech to use? And obviously, you're here at the Sanity webinar, so we got chosen. But like, how did you get there? Like, how did you find us, kind of, and other services?
Yeah. So on the tech side of things, honestly, the thing that made us choose you for a lot of the builds that we do is essentially how developer friendly Sanity has been. Right. It's very easy to build something fairly quickly on your platform. And I'm not talking about just like data modeling itself, but I'm talking about like the actual integrations with, for example, Shopify in this case. And with, I think that this update just happened like a few weeks ago with your Sanity Connect update, that you now connect, you have like a deep integration with Shopify and their meta objects. So for us, as Greg already said, like these integrations, these deep integrations is what makes our lives easier and what makes us choose a platform that is easier to develop on, easier to use, and is also friendly for merchants or content editors to use your UX, basically.
And I'm sure people are also curious, like what do you usually go for when it comes to the front-end technology and where you host stuff and all of that?
Yeah, so it really depends. We have multiple options depending on the types of builds that we do. Our most frequent one is usually a Vue.js stack. It's essentially a custom framework that we've built using Vue.js that works with Shopify, that works with Sanity. But if we're doing something completely headless with Shopify, then we end up using their own tech stack for Hydrogen, Oxygen, using React, basically, and using, again, Sanity's Connect to make everything work together.
Nice. Yeah, it has been interesting to follow the development of Hydrogen and so on. And yeah, the recent acquisition of Remix as well. But yeah, so you can't mention this client by name, unfortunately, but we're also curious, like walk us through kind of like what a success story look like. Like what should people replicate if they want to kind of like get ahead with this combo?
Sure. So yeah, I can't mention them by name. Maybe we will at some point soon, hopefully. But essentially, we have this client in the beauty space that approached us with a problem. So they've built this like incredible, vibrant online community. There was no e-commerce yet. It was literally just a community around the beauty space. Then it was built on WordPress. But again, WordPress couldn't keep up with their growth, whether it was in terms of like the content that we're putting out there, but also in terms of the internal team having to work with WordPress as well. So that's when they came to us. Essentially, that's when we discussed replatforming them to Shopify Plus. We also introduced Sanity in this case, and we ended up creating this unified content and commerce experience for them. Part of the process involved migrating, I believe it was something like over 4,000 articles from WordPress, because they didn't want to lose all that content. Obviously, they didn't want to lose the SEO that they've essentially like built up over the last few years. So that in itself was a challenge. But then it was also just building this architecture of their new site to give their team this ultimate flexibility, right? So Sanity powers everything that's related to blogs, product enrichments as well, while Shopify essentially handles everything that's e-commerce related. And then you have Sanity Connect in the middle of that just is the glue between Sanity and Shopify, where I believe we use it to sync products and collections to Sanity. But yeah, in the end, like we created this highly custom blog for them where they're able to essentially sprinkle some product recommendations and ecom. Yeah, that's it. That's pretty much it.
Nice. I'm very impressed. You were able to move 4,000 WordPress posts out of WordPress, and you're still here to talk about it. How did you do that?
In all fairness, that was I didn't do that personally. That was our fantastic app team that did that. So all the props goes to them. But what they did is they've developed this, or our principal developer actually developed this custom import tool that essentially works with not just Sanity, but it works with different systems as well. So if I remember correctly, like the whole process, the way that it started off is we had our front-end team do the data modeling on Sanity. They worked very closely with that customer just to figure out what exactly were their needs, how can they be using these Sanity to answer all their needs for their blog. Once that was done, we essentially, the app team connected to the WordPress API. They were able to do the data map between what was currently on WordPress, what is going to be their new content model on Sanity. They imported all the assets directly using the APIs as well, because the images that are hosted on WordPress can no longer be on WordPress. Obviously, they had to be moved into Sanity. And then while doing that import, they essentially remap the assets themselves to the actual articles and contents in Sanity. So I'm definitely like oversimplifying the work that was involved. It was a lot of work, a lot of manual labor as well to just get everything working correctly. But the app team did a fantastic job with that.
Yeah, and maybe we can kind of like dive in a bit, like, why is it hard to get out of WordPress? Because I sometimes also get this question, like, we want to move out of WordPress, and I'm always like, yeah, but you kind of don't maybe want to just kind of like take all the content and just put it into Sanity. Is what, like you said, you want to think about the data modeling, but then you have all of this WordPress HTML stuff, and you have to kind of like untangle that. Like, do you have like details on, or like strategies on how to kind of like approach that? And I can imagine like it looks probably different from install to install and all of that.
Yeah, it's very different from install to install. And I think you kind of alluded to it at the beginning as well when you were talking about the database in WordPress, right? Everything is essentially in this one table. Everything is usually in this one field. So untangling that really requires a lot of specialized work on our side for us to sit down, look at that content, figure out exactly how we want to split it. Because you're right, there's also HTML sometimes in there. There's sometimes WordPress shortcodes that are in there. And it's that mapping exercise that's extremely important at the very beginning of the project. And then just figuring out where to connect everything together and running the migration after that. But yeah, it is very much different from client to client.
Yeah, and I can imagine if I listen to this that it sounds a bit scary. Like this is costly, right? Like, why is it still worth doing that?
Worth the efforts of migrating off of WordPress?
Yeah. Assuming that it is.
Yeah, well, I seem to think so. But again, it's I think Greg alluded to this as well. It's, why would you stay stuck in something that doesn't meet all your needs, right? It's not tailored for you. So part of the effort of moving to something like Sanity is being able to have that tailored experience for your exact needs and having a better workflow at the end of the day and how you write your content, how you manage your content. But there's also improved performance, right? So again, WordPress sites can become slow, they can be bloated over time, and it's, again, this one monolithic architecture. While with headless CMSs, you can use APIs to call exactly what you need and when you need it, and you can really focus on the performance as well. But then simplify.
Sorry, go for it.
No, go for it, Greg.
No, I was just going to say that problematic and that worries about migration is the same for any type of migration, even though if it's not just WordPress to pure Sanity blog, it would be the same for WooCommerce to Shopify. From any type of migration, there is that worry about the fact that you're going to have to change, both in terms of data modeling, but also in terms of training. Like there's also the part of training your team in order to manage that new tool, and that worry that some part of the team has been handling everything since for a while on that specific tool, and the fact that they're going to need to relearn that aspect. But most of the convincing that we have to do, and that we have part of the reason why we're advising for migration is for exactly what you mentioned. Like it's avoiding tech debt, and also just providing new feature, providing like helping the growth that they came to us in the first place to achieve, and also allowing them to just continue to improve their overall website.
Yeah, and I guess like another cool side effect almost, or maybe just it's like the main effect of doing that move is like once you have like your content in something like Sanity, like you get like so much more value out of it because you can start to repurpose and reuse it in ways you couldn't with WordPress, right? So you can give it more life and more value as well. So that just in itself might justify doing a bit of that custom work that you need to do. But you said something interesting here, Greg, about like, yeah, like those editors and content teams that are like, they have like figure out how to work around WordPress and get stuff done. And now this agency is coming in with this new Santi Studio thing, and I have to relearn it. Like, how do you address those worries that might come up? And what are your experience when people are like finally getting into their new tool and get productive with it?
So I'd say like one of the biggest aspect of it is making sure that the people that are using the tool on a day-to-day basis and that are going to use that tool on a day-to-day basis are involved when we go through the discovery for that, and when we chat with them about how we're going to build the content modeling and just understanding how we're going to build the content modeling for their needs. They need to be in the room, because those are the people that are using it day to day that are really truly going to be sweating their life into learning that new process and really going through it and building new articles. So we need to make sure that everything that they were able to do, they're going to be able to do as well, and so much more. So it's also it's a part of this selling process for us as well, because we have to make sure that they understand that we're not taking away something from them. We're just trying to bring them on a new platform that's going to just empower them to do even more, and that they're going to be less limited to what they were able to do before.
This makes me so happy to hear. And it's so interesting because often people have been used to, like, I have to learn this technology, and like I have to work for this technology to kind of like make things happen. And what's kind of what you're saying is like you flip that around. No, it's like the technology is supposed to work for you. It's like, what do you need? And then we can make that happen. And
Exactly.
so in my experience, like that's like the mind shift for a lot of people. Oh, I can ask for a thing and then I can get it. Amazing. And it's open to be part of that process as well. But yeah, involving people turns out super key. Interesting. So I think we are getting slowly closer to questions and so on. Again, if you have watching live and you have questions for us, just pop them into the chat and then we will kind of like pick them up. We've talked about kind of like this success story and so on. Like, do you have like facts, kind of like stats? Like, was there something that kind of like changed a lot once you were up with the new stack? If you can share.
That's going to be part of our case study. So it's not. I don't have those stats yet. Usually, that's our wonderful marketing team that works on that and gets them out for us. But from what I've seen, is there's definitely been a shift in terms of performance. Like they do have a faster website, and they're able to do more in terms of what they wanted to do, at least in terms of the content that's on there. We're still, this is very much an active client, so we're still ironing out some things for them, because they're still also trying to figure out Sanity, because it's, as you said, it's brand new for them. And we're making sure that, you know, we are adding everything that they are missing, and making sure that they're well trained in using that system as well. But definitely, once our case studies are out, we'll probably share some stats as well on what that looks like.
Awesome. Yeah, I didn't mean to put you on the spot, but just so
it's all good.
And as you say, like we're like still kind of figuring out how all of this should work. It's not kind of like the answers aren't already out there for a lot of these things, and that's partly because expectations and requirements have changed, and we are kind of like in some areas catching up, right? So that's that feels like natural. But yeah, like, have you seen kind of like a shift in how your client thinks about kind of like the way ahead and the opportunities they now have?
In terms of like the content itself, or
yeah, like they have like they or other clients you have this new like tech stack. It's composable. The legacy stuff is gone, and they might have like learned now that technology can work for them and not the other way around. Like, have that kind of like opened some eyes for like how to think about this stuff and ideas and so on. Do you see that in your clients' work?
Yeah, there's definitely a shift happening with that, especially with the ones that have used headless CMS in the past. The one thing that I do see, at least from talking to prospect, is that if they've ever touched any headless CMS, they will always ask for a headless CMS. They don't want to go back to something that doesn't empowers them the way that a headless CMS does. And then it's just the teams themselves, the marketing team, the content writing team, they now live essentially in these tools, right? They don't need to be inside of Shopify, for example. They don't need to learn Shopify. They just need to learn how to use Sanity, and that's their world, and they excel at that. So I think that's where the shift is happening, is we don't need to learn all these services anymore. We just need to learn what's important for us.
I'd even say design-wise, like it opens up way more possibility for them. Like they're not restricted as much by the platform that is going to be underneath it. Like they can really expand and just really go a little bit crazier, or a bit more like really focus on their brand identity and portray it in the ways they really want to, and the way we would idea it was during our design process. So it's something like they can really go above and beyond. Not to quote Toy Story, but
I think we should quote Toy Story quite more. Yeah, sure. I don't have a good segue from Toy Story to Q&A, but I guess that was the segue. So we have gotten a couple of questions. You mentioned SEO, and a question here is like, how is SEO, or search engine optimization, impacted or managed with a multi-system headless CMS versus a monolithic CMS? So like, how does like the SEO story look like?
So it's not too different. So if we've done our job properly and we've modeled all of this, the SEO ends up living inside of Sanity as well. All the fields that you would expect to see in WordPress, you would see them in Sanity. And it's essentially where you would keep things stored, right? So it's not going to change much. The one thing that I would say maybe it does change a little bit is when you're interacting with other systems like Shopify, or when you're migrating from a completely different URL structure, and like you want to make sure you don't lose all that SEO juice, right? So you have to make sure, one, all the redirects are done properly, but you're also linking to the right content, and then just figuring out that whole strategy.
Yeah, and I guess also.
Sorry, go for it.
Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say it's also an inherent part of any migration. Same as we said before, like it's part of the exercise that we go through for any type of migration, because that's also one of the most important aspects, reducing the risk of any change in your tech stack, and that include WordPress with Sanity, that include WooCommerce to Shopify, or any type of change in platform. Like we need to reduce as much as risk that could be inherent to that, and just understanding as much as possible both your content and how it's going to be presented is going to reduce that risk, and also obviously the experience in handling that type of migration.
Yeah, for sure. And I can imagine, like, if you do like serious SEO and where like headings and like the semantic stuff that happens on the page like becomes super crucial, it's so much easier to control all of that in a headless CMS or a Sanity and so on, versus a system where you can put in any HTML anywhere, right? So another question: would it be easier to import content from WordPress using the VP Graphql plugin?
I would say it depends. It really depends on the content, right? Because if, again, depending how it's stored, and you want to be able to separate that information so that you can put it into a reusable data model, then there's still a lot of work to be done in terms of like data mapping and getting it to fit perfectly. So for sure, like using GraphQL helps, because GraphQL it's great when you have to interact with any APIs. But yeah, it really depends on the client's content.
Yeah. And like what you get in the GraphQL payload is still often that blob of HTML that you have to process, right? As with the RESTful one. But yeah,
exactly.
But we haven't mentioned Gutenberg at all. But like, have you seen WordPress installs with Gutenberg? And did that make migration different?
I don't remember on the last one if Gutenberg was there. So that's something I would have to verify with the app team. But I assume it would make things a little bit more complicated. Yeah.
Because not to get too far into the weeds of this, but like I think Gutenberg introduced kind of like JSON objects in HTML comments and so on. So you have to kind of like serialize that out of the HTML as well, and so on. So I imagine it.
Yeah,
might get
a few
harder.
extra steps probably.
Yeah. Can you talk about your content modeling approach with your success story? That's an interesting one.
Yeah, well, I think our content modeling approach is essentially the same with anyone that we work with. Is usually we just sit down with our client and we talk about what their needs are, right? And if we're able to properly assess their needs and properly figure out how they want to reuse their content, that information is funneled into how we design the website, which is then funneled into how we model the actual content within Sanity. Again, it's very much oversimplifying it, because there's a lot of back and forths with our clients, like making sure, that we show them and how we've modeled it. We want them to use it a little bit as well to see if they're happy with it, if they feel comfortable. If it's too complicated, like if they have to go into multiple places, then we know we need to simplify what the model looks like. And then sometimes we reach out directly to you guys, to Sanity, to know, like, are we doing a good job here? Is there anything else that we could be doing to make this simpler and better for these clients?
Yeah, I would add to that, and as I mentioned before, like having the ability to talk to the team that's going to use it is crucial. And also like overall communication, and that goes back with also us as an agency talking to you guys to make sure that we're using and modeling on your tool properly based on how you're building your tool, and also on your potential roadmap as well, linked to the potential roadmap of the tool they're going to migrate to. So it's mainly a communication effort and understanding really truly what they're gonna how they're gonna use it, what needs to be done, what needs to be migrated, and what information needs to go through it as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I guess content modeling isn't necessarily something that has like a lot of people in web development and so on have like thought a lot about. Given we have had systems like WordPress where content modeling isn't so much a thing, and we are also kind of like working on making learning material available for like how to approach content modeling. Just like a plug there, like we have a new content modeling guide out now you can check out. But yeah, returning to your questions, as an agency, how would you convince clients on WordPress to move to Sanity or headless? What types of arguments would you use, or are you using, I guess?
I mean, it depends on a lot more than just that, I'd say. But most of the time, it's for exactly what we just discussed before. Is like how, like what they're using now. Like, if they're coming to us with that question, it's because they definitely have some business requirement behind it. So they definitely have an idea as to why they feel like WordPress is not cannot carry them forward. And that's where, like, understanding why they feel that, and understanding the reason why they feel that and where they want to go, is where you can make the best link. Because once again, it's all about communication. We need to understand what they're trying to achieve, so that we can really empower them with the tools that we're going to build for them, being a headless website, or moving away as a blog to Sanity, so that they can really and truly achieve what they set their mind to. And as you mentioned, is using the technology to bring them to new heights, and not making sure that they work for the technology and making sure that it's maintained. It's really to help them upgrade and understanding why they're trying. They feel like they are constrained by WordPress is going to be the best way to convince anyone to move for what to do to take the step. Which is definitely not an easy one, but it's a good way to approach it, I feel.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, making people feel understood is a great way to sell them things. I can endorse that for sure. Oh, here's an interesting one. Do you recommend doing the migration progressively, using reverse proxies, migrating some of the pages, etc., or do you prefer to do like a hard switch, stopping the configuration, running migration script, and changing domains and all of that stuff?
So it's a little bit of both, I would say. So we do have, most of the time we actually have the hard switch approach, just because it is less painful to do it that way. Like, why not rip the Band-Aid in one shot and just get it over and done with? But we still have to, in our approach, do it progressively before the launch date happens, right? We want to make sure that all the content is slowly being entered or added to Sanity, and the client can start using it already, making sure, sanitizing their own stuff actually in there to make sure everything is looking good before that hard switch happens. But yeah, most of the time I would say just purely a hard switch, just to rip the Band-Aid out, get it over and done with.
All right. Let's see. One gap in functionality between WordPress and headless systems is user-defined views, page builders, etc. Next.js, I assume, makes it easy to do dynamic routing, and I would say Vue, Nuxt, and so on probably have the same thing. But we ran into questions about techniques for allowing user-defined components for the dynamic route. Any advice? I think this is about page builders and how you can can dynamically compose pages within a system like this. Like, have you experience with setting this up? And how do you approach it?
With Sanity itself, because there's no actual page builder, right? Like, you can move things around in your page, but you don't have that same functionality as a classic page builder where you could literally put anything that you want in there.
Yeah, so like a Webflow thing or a WordPress Elementor plugin or a Gutenberg even, I guess, where you can just drag components around and set padding and all of that stuff, right?
Yeah, exactly. There's some levels of control that we tend to give clients as well, because some of them still want to be able to do these visual modifications. We try to limit them as much as possible. But I think that's one of the main things that clients have to adapt to, is not being able to do whatever you want, right? In terms of visually updating your site. Like, it's something that we have to talk about in terms of content modeling and making sure we empower you to do that. But if it's, I don't know if it's related to like how these components are probably loaded as well, the question, but that's something that we try to do as well, is to dynamically load these components when they're needed, and especially when the user is actually looking at them, right? Like, we try not to load everything in one shot, even because, one, for performance reasons, and two, because the person visiting the website might not even scroll that far down in the page anyways.
Yeah, I'm going to just take a kind of like a wild bet, but like, when you design a new website or web presence, you probably make like components and like have like a design system and so on, right? And you reuse them across like the different views and templates. And I think sometimes you can kind of like map those components to objects in Sanity, for example, and that people can like compose layouts, but they are kind of like restricted to the design system you have made. Is that kind of like?
Well, yeah, it's pretty much that. Like, every section is essentially a component that we've built in our code that gets reused wherever the content writers want to put that section on the page.
And that lets them kind of like build, like, for example, landing pages and so on pretty efficiently without having to think about padding and shadows.
Exactly. Because we follow that design system that our designers have built, and it already has like these set paddings that just,
and things
wherever you
nice.
You stick them there and it looks nice wherever you stick it. At least that's the goal.
Sure. All right. I think we have time for one more question. Let's see. Can you explain the benefits you experience using structured content compared to the traditional content structures in WordPress? I guess you have touched a bit on it already, but yeah.
I think it's just the flexibility that you have with the structured content, is that you can build it exactly how you want it for your own needs. Well, you could kind of do that with WordPress, but it involves a lot more jumping through hoops to get it to work the way you want it to. And then again, you can't really reuse a lot of the stuff in a way that you would with a headless CMS, right? That's the thing that you want to save, is you want people to be able to quickly create a landing page while reusing content that they've already created and used elsewhere.
I think that's a beautiful note to end on. But yeah, thank you so much for spending this time with us and sharing from your experience. Where can people find you if they are curious about Shopify and composable stacks and getting scale and all of that good stuff?
Sure. I think we're pretty easy to find with a name like ours. So we make websites.com. You'll essentially find everything. We have a lot of blogs, a lot of articles that Greg has written as well, that myself and the rest of the We Make team has written. So yeah, we make websites.com and find everything you need there.
Yeah, go check it out.
LinkedIn and then social as well.
Yeah,
we're pretty much everywhere.
Awesome. And we look forward to seeing more of your work and hearing more stories from your clients. So yeah. And thanks for all of you who were watching live and for you who are watching this recording. Yeah, get in touch with us at Sanity as well if you have questions about moving from WordPress or e-commerce and composable stacks and all of that stuff. And that's it for now. Thank you so much.